speak out, we can tell the truth of what we've seen. We are not liars.
Welcome to Veterans Hour. I'm your host, Zahid Chowdhury. Veterans Hour is a production of Veterans for Peace in Olympia, Washington. Today's show is about veterans challenging Islamophobia. American Muslims have often been subjected to racism, xenophobia, and scapegoating behaviors and attitudes. The human dignity and human rights of Muslims are often not respected. Some folks, including some national political leaders, are in support of these attitudes and practices. These attitudes and practices fall far short of the ideals of our nation. Each year, the Islamophobia industry spends over tens of millions of dollars to make Americans afraid of Muslims and Islam. The websites, YouTube videos, books, white papers, and media stars of the Islamophobia industry turn the hearts and minds of people against one another, paving the way for a more divided, fearful future. We do not have to live in that future. Together, we can build a future based on our shared values and visions for America. Today, our guests are Reverend Terry Kylo and Anil Afzali, and they will be talking with us about overcoming Islamophobia, faith over fear, and standing with our Muslim neighbors roadshow. So I will start with Pastor Reverend Terry Kylo. What compelled you to do this roadshow about standing with our Muslim neighbors, and why it is important to you?
Well, for me, it all began with chicken fried steak. About 5 years ago in Marysville, Washington, I was taken by a congregation member to this restaurant that was owned by a Pakistani Muslim family. And my congregant had chicken fried steak, but I had some chicken jalfrezi, which was really good. And I got to know Shabir and his wife. Mm-hmm. And as I got to know them more, we began to have some conversation. And they introduced me to another Muslim gentleman. And he and I and a Buddhist began some interfaith dialogue and conversation. And over that time, I got to know Jeff, the Muslim man, very well. And we were invited finally to go to Oak Harbor, Washington, by some folk to go and talk about Muslims as Americans and some of the fears that people sometimes have about Muslims. And so we went, we had about 90 people show up. And we did about 3 or 4 more of those events. And what I began to notice was how fearful some people were. And I also began to notice that they were asking almost the same questions in almost the same order every single place we went. So I began to do some research and some reading, not only about Islam, but not only about Muslims in America, but also about the Islamophobia industry. Mm. And I began to realize that the reason people were saying these same questions and making these same assumptions every single time was that they have been fed this by folk who spend about $30 million a year to make people afraid of Muslims. And so, I realized, we don't have to live this way. And that this sort of thing has happened before in human history. That human beings have gotten really fearful, have demonized another group of folk. And whenever we demonize another group of people, no good ever comes out of it. And as a Lutheran, I know my own history. I know that Lutherans in Germany in the 1930s not only did not stand up on behalf of their Jewish neighbors, they didn't know them to begin with. And they didn't really understand Judaism either. And there's a lot of people like myself in the Lutheran Church that have basically said, we don't want to make the same mistakes that some people in our tradition made in the 1930s. We don't want to make those same mistakes again. And so I really came to feel very strongly called. In fact, one day during Holy Week, I was speaking to some Muslim friends on the phone in my kitchen. And all of a sudden I realized in that phone call that I was very strongly called, I think by God, to stand with my Muslim neighbors, because they're not just my neighbors, they're fellow human beings, they're fellow American citizens. And really, it's not good for any of us to allow fear to take over like it is. And so what I'm trying to do is empower other Christians and people of other faith traditions to stand with their Muslim neighbors and during this moment when a lot of folk are bearing false witness about them. And that together we can push back on that and come to a more joyous and harmonious way to live together as human beings here.
Great, thank you. Anila, I mean, you have taken that as a mission?
Absolutely. First off, thank you so much, Zahid, for having us here. It is such an honor. And I want to start by saying that I am a proud American Muslim woman. And I firmly believe in sort of the aspirational ideals that make me proud to be an American. And I'm so bothered by what I see happening in our country today with this growing divisiveness, the fear, the hate, and even the violence, unfortunately. We've had some of our nation's worst anti-Muslim hate crimes in our nation's history. And with the numbers that you are seeing, the amount of bullying of students, of American Muslim kids and their families, it is really alarming. And it's really disturbing to see that. And as oftentimes you can look at these hate crimes and they're just numbers and statistics until you actually know the people behind those numbers, behind those statistics. Then it has that real personal impact on you. And you get to see sort of the individuals who are affected by this, the way it affects families. A friend of mine who had her father-in-law killed just outside while he was praying one day in Portland, Oregon. Another friend of mine who was sort of beaten while waiting for a bus up in Everett. Another person who was hit with a glass bottle at her face while she was wearing a head covering at the UW Seattle campus. These are the kinds of things that are happening, and there's a lot of fear and anxiety, and a lot of what is happening goes against our core constitutional values, the things that our nation was built on, things like religious freedom, like tolerance, like respecting the right of every single person to pray and worship as they wish, or to be free from worship if they wish. So these are the kinds of attacks that we're seeing happening in our country. And for me, I actually had a spiritual transformation. I grew up sort of a typical American growing up, I guess you can say. I was very blessed to be able to go to college, to be the first in my family to graduate from college. And my aspirations didn't stop there, because in Islam, we are taught that everyone, man or woman, should pursue knowledge. That is an important aspect of what Islam teaches us. So pursuing my faith values was continuing on to be blessed to go to Harvard Law School, get my law degree, come back to the Northwest and work here at a couple law firms, made partner at one law firm, and then went in-house as general counsel of one of my clients, served in their legal department. And then I had a spiritual transformation. And I believe that spiritual transformation happened at exactly the right time, because it was the right time for me to sort of put a pause in my legal career and really pursue knowledge and service, which are two things that our faith, of course, emphasizes so strongly. So I started doing this, and the reason I say it was the opportune time, the right time, is because this is when we're seeing Islamophobia on the rise. This is when we are seeing, again, some of the highest levels of hate crimes against American Muslims. And this is when I started learning myself, not only about Islam and its beautiful teachings and seeing and experiencing the beautiful impact that was having on my own life, but I was seeing the negative aspect of what was happening in our country with the Islamophobia industry, with a core network of anti-Muslim hate groups, individuals and groups that are propagating, promoting, and spreading this narrative of fear and divisiveness to really try to divide we the people. And it was bothering me to see this happening in our great country. It was bothering me to hear about these things that were attacking our core constitutional values. And so for me, it was the right time to be able to step in and start working on combating Islamophobia, combating anti-Muslim discrimination and bigotry and hate, because it's not just affecting Muslims. It hurts all of us as Americans when we allowed something like this to happen. Excuse me. So that's why I was very honored and fortunate to get to meet Pastor Terry Kylo, and we started embarking on this roadshow, this Faith Over Fear roadshow, because we really want to stand for love over hate, facts over fiction and fear-mongering, and really show that faith is greater than fear. And that's what we've been able to do, is to go to different cities, towns, and have this roadshow, have an opportunity to visit our neighbors in places like Mount Vernon, like Olympia, like Tacoma, all over the Western Washington, and soon we're going to be going to Eastern and Central Washington as well, and use this as an opportunity to connect with our neighbors, get to know them, help them understand what's happening, as Pastor Terry mentioned, sort of why they are being filled with this fear and hatred of Muslims, of their Muslim neighbors. What is driving that? How are they being fed some of this narrative of fear and divisiveness instead of learning the truth about Muslims? And that's what we try to do, is give them the opportunity to ask a Muslim, I'm there, and also talk to Pastor Terry, and we discuss the Islamophobia industry. We have the charts. You can see some of the actual members and the groups that are part of this Islamophobia network, and really finding this as an opportunity for us to unite on our shared American values, unite on what actually brings us together and makes us stronger together, knowing that we are all in this together.
Great, great. So this is one of the reasons that several veterans organizations and veterans are challenging Islamophobia. There's a website called Veterans Challenge Islamophobia in communities all across our country. You can get involved with challenging Islamophobia, and you're welcome to go to veteranschallengeislamophobia.org and /resources, and you have a lot of resources there. So my question was, how long are you going to do this?
Well, I don't know. I never thought I'd be doing something like this. But then in the Christian tradition, God has the right to call us to things that we didn't consider before. God certainly called Abram and Sarah to leave their homeland, and they didn't know where they were going. And so I don't know where I'm going either. But I do know that in following this calling, I'm really trying to be faithful to Jesus. Throughout his life and his ministry, Jesus consistently took the side of people that were being othered. They were being demonized or left behind. And he got into a lot of trouble for having dinner with them and for speaking with them and speaking of them in ways that were positive. You know, when Jesus was asked by a lawyer, and who is my neighbor? His response wasn't to tell a story about how Jews were supposed to be nice to Samaritans, people with whom Jews had both racial and religious differences. He actually told a story about how Samaritans had the humanity, because of their faith tradition, because they were children of God, to be good neighbors to a Jewish person that was hurt alongside the road. And so honestly, brother, I don't know where this leads and where this goes. All I can say is that at the moment, I feel such kinship with Anila, with all the other Muslims that I've met. I've found them to be my friends, to be my fellow human beings. I've learned a lot from them. So I don't know where it goes. And we're just going to have to wait and see, and I'm going to have to trust that God will show me how long that I'm called to do this.
This is wonderful. This is wonderful. And you have done how many road shows so far?
Well, I've done over 40 public events across Western Washington, largely in more rural areas. Because in many places, given the fact that Muslims make up between 1% and 2% of the overall population, a lot of people haven't ever met Muslims. And so I've done over 40 events, including 11 Faith Over Fear events with Anila. And what I've tried to do is go into churches and create space where my Muslim neighbors have a chance to speak, and where their fellow Americans have a chance to listen to them for the first time. And what's amazing is how often folk walk up to me and say, "That was the first Muslim I've ever met." And you can just see the fear shedding off of them. You can just see them relaxing and realizing, wow, these Muslims are just people like us.
That's beautiful.
It's wonderful.
Yes. So Anila, what do you think your audience should do to to really mitigate it and overcome it. And phobia, like any phobia, any irrational phobia, have to be mitigated and overcome. Because it doesn't only affect other people's life negatively, but the person who's living with that fear, who's changing their life, and they're looking at the whole world and reality with that tainted lens, and they can't see clearly. So what do you think, what people should do, what folks should do?
Well, you're absolutely right, Brother Zahid. The reality is that fear does consume the person themselves too. And this is why actually in the Quran, fear is described as coming of the devil, right? Like it's something that we should not be allowing ourselves to fall victim to fear. And many people, unfortunately, are fearful today. And that's part of what we try to do with this roadshow, was to sort of show people that they do not have the fear that they think they have, right? Like really helping them understand what is it that they're scared of, and what are they directing their fear at, and why is that wrong, right? I understand people having fear, but the target of their fear is the wrong place, and that's really what we try to address. And I think the reality is that what people need to do to overcome their fear is just to actually meet their American Muslim neighbors, right? As Pastor Terry was mentioning, just when they do that, just when they have the opportunity to actually meet the people that they think they are fearful of, they realize that there's no reason for fear. We have so much in common. Christians and Muslims have so much in common. All of us as Americans have so much in common. We literally are all in this together. And getting people to understand that. The reality, unfortunately, is that the majority of our fellow Americans do not personally know a Muslim and do not know much about Islam. And when people don't know much about a minority community in our country or anywhere, unfortunately, they believe the misinformation, the lies, the conspiracy theories, all of these things that are being promoted by this network of groups that are anti-Muslim. And as I tell my friends, it's like, when you actually get the chance to get to know someone, when you actually have that human connection, it becomes entirely different. Then you realize that you share the same fears, you share often the same hopes and dreams, and we all kind of want the same thing. And that, I think, is beautiful. So I would highly recommend that people actually get to know their American Muslim neighbors. They can do things like go to a mosque, go to many of these interfaith events that are happening right now. They can actually learn about this network and the kind of fear and false information that they are propagating, or as Pastor Terry says, which I agree, the false witness. They're bearing false witness
yes.
against their Muslim neighbors. So that's something that they can learn about. And then also take every opportunity to introduce others to their Muslim friends, right? Because unfortunately, because the population of the American Muslims is so small, everybody might not get the chance to personally meet somebody or build that personal relationship. So that's why it's important to have people, bring people together. Pastor Terry talks about the power of the potluck. Bring people together. We can all do that, right? We can all bring something and break bread together and enjoy our time together that way. The other thing that I would say is, especially because so much of the misinformation about Muslims today comes through the media, we can also use the media as a way to promote a different narrative, a positive narrative, a narrative of love and faith and unity, a narrative of our shared American values. And the way people can do this, and every single person watching has the opportunity and ability and power really to do this, and that is to simply write an article, an op-ed, a letter to the editor of a mainstream media outlet, and share the stories of the American Muslims that they know. Talk about the lives and contributions, and really emphasize our shared American values, what brings us together, the commonalities that we have. If people can share those stories, that can be empowering. That can actually help combat the dehumanization process that is happening with Muslims in our country today. And I tell them, I say, as bad as things are today, it is an amazing time to be alive. It is an incredible time when we have such the power and potential, the opportunity to make a real difference in the future of our country, the future direction of our country, the soul of our country. We are literally writing history with our actions today and also our inactions. And this is why I try to remind people of the quote from Martin Luther King Jr., right? Where he specifically said that in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence
Of
of
our
our
friends.
friends. Yeah. So the Islamophobia industry, they can be our enemies, but that's not what I focus on. I focus on our friends. I focus on all the people coming together at this time and the potential that we have to truly write a better narrative, a narrative of unity, a narrative of love, a narrative of coming together, standing firm, and showing that faith truly is greater than fear.
Surely it is. So, Reverend Terry Kylo, would you please tell us what is this Islamophobia industry?
Yeah, so they're a collection of hate groups, labeled that by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And together, they collect about $30 to $35 million a year. And through YouTube videos and websites, through books, and through speakers, through folk that are on TV all the time.
You mean those folks are paid to spread hatred and venom over the airwaves?
Indeed, indeed. And they make a lot of money doing it.
I saw that figure somewhere between 2008 to 2013. There was like over 200 million US dollars were just by some of these groups.
Indeed. And that's why we use the term, I think a conservative number, 30 million per year. And then these groups, there's about 40 of them or so. They are the primary movers in the Islamophobia industry, and they all kind of support each other. They all kind of mirror each other's fearful and defamatory language, really, about our Muslim neighbors. And there's another 40 organizations around them that are media organizations that promote their hate-filled language. And then on top of that, there's a lot of bloggers and people on Facebook and so forth that will continue to support. So if folk go online and they type in, what's the truth about Islam, they're most likely to get a website from the Islamophobia industry. So folk think that they're out there doing, rational research, looking through Google, trying to understand their Muslim neighbor. What they're probably getting is actually the product of hate groups that put themselves off as being really American patriots. But these are not patriotic people, ultimately, because what they're really saying is we want to take away the civil liberties of Muslims, that they want to take away the religious liberties of Muslims. And what we know about rights is that when it's taken away for one group, it's taken away for all. And so what these groups are doing is a really anti-American, anti-constitutional, anti-democratic kind of thing by trying to focus everyone's fear, focus everyone's uncertainty on one group of people. And that is just wrong, and that's not what the core values of America really is all about.
So when we strip the humanity of any one group in a community, a society, or in a country, we do that, it's eventual, it's just a matter of time that it will happen to others.
Exactly.
So how would you shed more light on it and make sense because folks want to know, audience wants to know why they do that. Of course the money is one motive. I had the cuttings of several newspapers after 9/11 that the quickest way to become a millionaire in America is to start Islamophobic church. You start a church which is Islamophobic, and you just, you get higher ratings, and this is the quickest way to become a millionaire in America. But here and now, circa 2018, how can we enlighten people? How can we? Feel free to, jump in and tell me. How could we help our audience to understand and see the narratives and the difference between the framings?
So I just would say that we're living in very anxious times. And one of the things I say on the roadshow is that there's tremendous change taking place in our culture. First is, we're seeing the increase of automation and mechanization taking away manufacturing jobs. We're seeing incredible demographic changes in the country, and that makes some people uncomfortable because they don't remember what happens at Thanksgiving. What happens at Thanksgiving is when someone new comes in, you make more room around the table. And that's the way America is at its best. And so everyone's going to have a chair around the table. It just means there'll be a few more chairs around the table in the future. But also, Americans are very lonely.
Yes.
40% of us claim chronic loneliness. And so you add up all these changes, the sort of sense that there isn't quite enough, that the economy is like not quite working for everyone, and the sense that manufacturing jobs are kind of going away, and there's a lot of fear out there. And so what these groups are doing is basically trying to take that fear, and instead of naming it, instead of helping us to address those challenges, they're focusing all that fear on one group. And we saw the same pattern happen in history before, in many situations, including Nazi Germany, where they focused a lot of fear and anxiety on 1 to 2% of the population. That's the percentage that Jews were in Germany in the 1930s, and that's the same percentage that Muslims are today. As to why some of these groups get this much money is very difficult to say. But I suspect that a lot of it has to do with making money by making people fearful, and then people vote for larger and larger military spending, right, in a way that benefits tremendously the folk that give the money to these groups.
Yeah, and I've told people too that one way that I could be reached very quickly is to turn around as a Muslim, as an educated American Muslim woman, to turn around and start criticizing Islam. That would be very quick, instant route toward being rich and on every single TV show or talk show that I would want to be on. But I'd have to just give up my integrity, which I'm not willing to do, and pretty much lie. The reality is that this is a time where people need to hear some of the positive stories and make the personal connections. That's what it boils down to. When people actually get the opportunity to do that, then they can build a lot of the tools that they need to counter the fear, to counter the misinformation, to counter what is happening in our country. And that's why we emphasize that so strongly. That's why it's also important for us to be able to reach people in different places. And we welcome people. I know people have a lot of questions about Islam because they don't understand certain issues or concepts or especially things that have been misconstrued or misinformed. So it's very important for them to get a basic understanding of that. That's why we do things at the mosque I'm with, the Muslim Association of Puget Sound. We have a quarterly open house. We give people opportunities to come and listen and join us and actually ask questions of the people who are practicing the faith every single day. You know, I mentioned the spiritual transformation that I had in my own life. I have personally witnessed the experience of being Muslim. I was born Muslim, but I, later in life had this transformation. I've experienced the positive impact it has had on me. I've experienced the positive impact on my brother, on my family, on my father. I have seen sort of all of this positivity come out of it. But that's not the image of Islam that most people get every day. Nor do they hear about sort of how Muslims have been part of our country since the very beginning, since before Christopher Columbus even. A lot of people don't know that up to 30% of slaves who were brought from Africa were Muslim. They don't know that Thomas Jefferson had a copy of the Quran and that the founding fathers specifically recognized Muslims. They called them Mahometans at the time, but they specifically recognized Muslims in defining the parameters of religious freedom and equal protection under the law. They don't think about the fact that in 1935, the Supreme Court recognized Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as one of the greatest lawgivers in history. They don't talk about the fact that Harvard Law School, where I went, has a quote from the Quran as one of the greatest manifestations of justice in the world, posted at the Faculty Law Library.
Which is that quote?
It's from the Quran. It says, "O you who believe, stand firmly for justice, even if it's against yourself or your family or your kin, because God sees all, because He is the true judge." So it's a beautiful, powerful quote, and it really captures this strong sense of justice in Islam, and that's why it's there with other quotes about justice. So people don't think about that. People don't think about the fact that we have had American Muslim sports icons that everybody recognizes, the greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali, right? We've had civil rights leaders, Malcolm X. We have current politicians and athletes, Ibtihaj Muhammad bringing home a medal for Team USA in the Olympics. And we have all of this. So we have a lot to build on. We have a lot of opportunity to actually sort of connect and get to know our American Muslim neighbors, to find ways to unite. And I've had the experience both on the road show and at the various events we've had at our mosque or elsewhere where I go and speak, is when people actually hear you and they actually connect with you, or they actually learn a little bit about what Islam teaches or what American Muslims believe, they're like, wow. It's almost like their whole demeanor changes. I've had people on the road show tell me that they had never met a Muslim before, that the 2 hours they spent with us at the road show was some of the most valuable time that they had. I've had people give me a hug and cry about how they were really infected. That's a good way to say it.
So it's liberating.
It is
Once you
liberating.
shed
Yes.
your fears,
Yes.
it is liberating. It's
Absolutely.
a sense of freedom and liberty. True
Absolutely.
sense of freedom and liberty. When you shed your
Yes.
irrational and fears and anxiety.
Yes, absolutely.
So on those lines, it's just interesting that commercial media makes money. If it bleeds, it reads, and other things.
Yes.
But here we are, and in a quickest way to become a millionaire in America, and all those other things. So I mean, we really cannot, say or blame the ordinary folks for their views, because they do not know any better and they have not met. As you said, most of the people have not met Muslims, and probably you could suggest some, remedies for that. So it is good to hear those, testimonials of folks that it was a great knowledge for them and it helped them a great deal, and they felt liberated and did great. I personally have first-hand experience how Islamophobia tears apart communities, how it affects people, how it changes their lives for the worst. How many victims it causes, and then it gets broader and broader. So it's a calling, I guess. It's on this table. I mean, you had a calling, and you had a calling, and my life is forever changed because of Islamophobia and those attitudes and other things I talked about earlier. So here we are. But please go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and we've also seen people who have been victims of hate crimes forgive people who've committed hate crimes against them. And we've had people who committed hate crimes against Muslims actually regret their actions when they had the chance to connect personally, right? Again, that personal connection. There are stories, there's a lot of different stories across our nation, but one that I'll mention because he moved here recently to the greater Seattle area is Rice Bouillon, who had actually been shot in the face by somebody for being Muslim, and he actually then fought for this guy to not be given the death penalty when he committed this anti-Muslim hate crime against him. His faith, as many other people and many other examples that we have, exactly, forgiveness is so strong in Islam. So because of Islam, because of his faith tradition, he forgave the man. And like I said, not only did he forgive him, but he even fought for him to be saved as well, because he recognized that this is really sort of a disease, this fear, this hate, this violence. It's a disease, and it hurts us all as human beings. And the sooner we can all learn to overcome that, overcome both the hate, the fear, the Islamophobia, the greater we are all as human beings and as communities. So we have many examples like that. I know of another man who actually shot his rifle into a mosque next door. He lived next door to a mosque, yet he never entered that mosque. And he would have all kinds of anti-Muslim material on his social media page and such, promoting anti-Muslim violence and hatred. And one day he decided to take his own advice, and he took his rifle and he shot next door. Fortunately, nobody got hurt in that incident, and the mosque invited him over, and they actually forgave him. And he said something that is so powerful. He actually said, you know what, if I had spent 5 minutes with you, I would not have done what I had done. That's all it would have taken is 5 minutes. That
the human connection is
yes.
truly, truly, truly priceless.
Yes.
I remember after 9/11, being in a mosque in Eastern Washington praying. And we were getting graffiti for weeks now and months, and and here we are, and then the rock comes through the window and hits me. And then I'm stopped by and I really want to go run after those, and do a citizen's arrest. And then, other attenders of the mosque, they say, who are praying, and they say, yeah, no, don't do that. Don't do that, let it go. I said, we have let it go for so many months. We have let it go for so many months. And this has to stop. And I went out there and did a citizen's arrest. And, then I find out they were teenagers, and they were just listening to hate-filled propaganda and didn't know any better. And then I felt so bad for, calling the police and doing a citizen arrest because they didn't know any better.
So as a kid growing up in La Crosse, Washington, a town of 300 people, I would watch the news, of course, with my folks. I would watch movies. The news, it's been found, only has about 5% positive coverage about Muslims and Islam. Now, generally, the news is negative about everybody, but it's especially negative about our Muslim friends. Movies, it's been found only about 36 of the characterizations of Muslims or Arabs in movies in the last century were positive. The rest were neutral or negative. And so to just those kids sitting out there in Eastern Washington, watching movies, watching TV shows, watching the news, they're only going to hear that negative story. What I wish they could find is a lot of the Muslims that I've met in the last 3 or 4 years, who are incredible people. So after the election, I went into my wife's work, and one of my wife's friends, one of our friends, her name is Nasreen. She was 5 months pregnant, and I just went in and I told her, I said, look, we're here with you, we're friends, and you've got a lot more friends than you know. And when I said that, she started tearing up. And so, we hugged just for a moment. And 5 months later, what we found was I was able to hold up her newborn child at an event in Bellingham where Jews and Buddhists and Christians and Muslims and atheists and some agnostics and some Hindus came together for a meal. And I was able to hold Layla up and said, Layla, I want to introduce you to your new friends. I mean, I wish they could come to know Benjamin, who served in the U.S. military and who has gone and spoken with me at a lot of different events and who loves this country. And he loves this country in part because he's Muslim, right? And he's an imam that takes really good care of his folk and is a good community member. I wish they knew Jamal, who's a public speaker who goes out and he even has Islamophobia industry people come out and follow him around and try to disrupt his events. But Jamal tries to respond to them with love because Jamal recognizes something that is true in the Christian faith, which is we know that love casts out fear. Darkness doesn't cast out darkness. It's light that casts out darkness. And so, I see in Jamal, the embodiment of love casting out fear. So I just wish folk could get to know more of these amazing Muslim American folk and folk like Anila. And anybody who says that Muslim women aren't strong should just watch Anila for about 12 seconds and know that that's not true. Those are just lies that are told about Muslims, or sometimes people hear things about other countries and assume that the civil rights problems that happen in those countries are because they're Muslim. Instead of, as Anila often reminds us, they actually deny human rights in some of those countries in spite of Islam. And I just want to remind people too that it's really important to learn about Islam from Muslims, from people who practice it. I wouldn't like it if people decided to learn about Christianity from people who hated Christians. I wouldn't like that. I wouldn't like it if they tried to learn about Christianity from Christian hate groups. We know that 60% of all the hate crimes in this country, happen on the part of white nationalists. I would hate to have my own faith confused with their sort of demented take on Christianity. And so I just want to encourage people to come at this with some real fairness of mind and to learn about Islam from people who practice it and to get to know their American Muslim neighbors. And I want to encourage faith leaders as well to realize how powerful they can be, to unleash the power of the potluck, create events where people who may be lonely, people who don't get to hang out with folk that are different from them, come together and have a meal or go out and do a service project and share some stories from their lives and come to see that we don't have to be quite so fearful of everyone, including our Muslim American neighbors.
Great. If there are a few things you would like to be profoundly enlightening for the audience, what do you think? Would you be, what would you like to share with the audience?
There's a lot of different things, but
Please,
so the
go
thing
for
that I will mention that I really hope the audience takes away is the reality that Islamophobia does not just hurt me. I mean, it does hurt me, right? I've had people drive by me, roll down their windows and yell obscenities at me. I've had people be scared of me in a library of all places. So I've experienced this. And of course, our mosque, our sign was vandalized twice in less than a month. And you described experiences you've had. I've had other friends who've also had the impact of Islamophobia. But it doesn't just hurt us. At the end of the day, Islamophobia hurts all of us as Americans. It hurts anybody who cares about our liberty, our freedoms, our values. All of these are compromised by Islamophobia. And as I think we need to really recognize is, as Pastor Terry said earlier, when you take away rights or liberties from one group, you impact everybody in our country. That it becomes a doorway to affecting others. That becomes a way of taking away the rights and religious liberties, specifically in this case, of other groups as well. So faith groups in particular should really be standing up right now, really standing up and say, we're not going to allow this against our American Muslim neighbors, because that could then be used as a tool against our religious freedoms and liberties. And people who care, even if they're of non-faith backgrounds, they should care about this, because Islamophobia opens the door to other forms of bigotry. That fear that it engenders really allows for all of our civil rights and liberties to be taken away in the name of national security or other measures like that. It allows for a more authoritarian state. These are reasons that we all, as Americans, as anybody who values freedom, as anybody who values human life, the value and sanctity of human life is at issue here. So anybody who cares about any of those things, which I hope are all the viewers and all Americans, and we should all care about this. And we should stand up, speak out, and make a difference. And the other thing that I will say is, besides the fact that it affects us all, is recognizing that, you know, here in America, we don't tell people how to pray. We don't tell people to worship or not. American Muslims should have the very same rights as all Americans to live and worship how they wish, how they please. That is what makes us great. That is what makes us American. And we should recognize that right for all others, just like American Muslims do for their fellow neighbors. And at the end of the day, recognizing the incredible power we have today. You know, I say this even when we go on the road show, I say, as bad as things are, it is incredibly energizing to be alive today, to be part of what we have going on today, to be able to do these road shows, these events with our neighbors all around, and to have people show up and get to know people, and building the coalitions that we're seeing being built all around, and faith communities coming together, and non-faith communities, and activist groups, and everybody sort of uniting, coming together, building coalitions, getting to know each other, and standing united. That is beautiful. That is inspiring. That's what gives me hope and strength and inspiration. And you see it also with the youth. You know, the beautiful impact of the youth coming together, of them standing up for our shared American values. So there are negative aspects of our times today. It's certainly troubling in a lot of ways, but at the same time, it's also a beautiful time to be alive. And I feel blessed to be part of these kinds of efforts with Pastor Terry Kylo and so many of our friends and allies across the state of Washington and even across the nation.
Great, thank you. Speaking on the same lines, I've been given a statement of our local veterans group. We are the United States military veterans, many of whom saw combat in Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, who are appalled by the current spate of bigotry, racism, and hatred expressed towards Muslims. Bigotry and racism violate all of the values we believed and we were defending during our military service. Pastor Terry Kylo, so you said you've been on this road show for about 8-10 months or so?
Yeah, we've been. I've been working full time for about a year, and about half time for a couple of years now, doing this work. And I want to say that what I have also discovered, like Anila, is actually a great deal of hope. I think despair for the future is underneath so much of our public conversation. But let's remember that the United States of America began during a time of incredible despair as well. And in a statement that was written at the time, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all people are created equal and are endowed with certain inalienable rights given by their Creator. And so when we look out our car windows, we look out the window of our homes, when we watch people on TV, I hope that we can remember the hope that our founders had when they wrote those words. And when we're out in the grocery store and we see somebody, coming down the aisle toward us, I hope we can begin to see that they are human beings, that they are equal with us, that we together decided to form a human community in the United States of America where everyone has rights. And those rights can't be taken away. They are part of us. They're part of our very nature. And that one way to honor our own humanity is to honor the humanity in the other and to help create systems of justice and equity so that everyone can live in this country. And I believe that's what veterans fought for. Mm-hmm. They don't fight for just a flag. Mm-hmm. They fight for the republic for which it stands. Mm-hmm. And for the constitutional way of life and respect that we seek to live out together in creating a more perfect union. So what I would want to say to everybody is don't give up hope. Mm-hmm. There are so many wonderful things happening in communities across this country, across the state. And let's all just do our small part and trust that we will create that more perfect union.
So tell us what you learned during this. What are some of the profound moments?
Once, the very first one we ever did, my friend Jeff was asked a question by a person. She had heard that Muslims wouldn't shake hands with people. And so he kind of answered, that some people take a certain vow not to shake hands perhaps from time to time. And then she said, well, will you shake my hand? And he said, no, but I will give you a hug. And she said, really? And he said, yeah, I'll hug you right now. And so she stood up and they hugged, and the room just melted. Yep. So when human beings make that contact and fight through the fear, find that our own fear is overcome by love, and we make a real human connection, that has the power to change the world. And I believe it is.
Yeah. I think it's our perspectives, our depth, our reservoir of life experiences, which calls us for those callings that we all have. My grandmother was a refugee. They were burning villages. So my grandmother ran with my young father, who was a child. And then they will hide during the day in tall crops or forests. And at night, they will travel, head west. And eventually, months later, in the Asian, July, August, September, heat, eventually months later, they arrived in a refugee camp across the border. So I have traveled extensively all over the world. And I've seen people, regardless of religion or no religion, they not only share the same inspirations and dreams as the rest of us, but we have a bond, a sacred bond of humanity. And when we try to strip any human being of that humanity and try to make them other, we cannot create, my grandmother would call it, beloved community. To create that beloved community tomorrow or today or the next moment onward, we have to have that reservoir of knowledge, experience, and personal first-hand experiences that let us know, what is the right thing to do and stand on the right side of history. My father is he's a great-grandfather because my sisters have, kids and whose kids have kids. And he still cries. He still cries that his best friend's mother's chest, he rose up. And when the propaganda on the media changed and made them the other, how quickly his best friend would not play with him. To me, that is very profound.
Yeah.
And grandmother's experience, grandmother was told that, my father, when he was a young child, he saw his own grandparents shot and killed in front of him. So we need to understand that grandmother said, only person you think is happy, who you really do not know the struggles in life. So, but always, I am who I am today because of the biggest influence on my life and who I am today is my grandmother, Sadiqan. And she always said, regardless of how much pain and suffering you might be, we need to put a smile on our face and try to create the beloved community, the beloved tomorrow that we all want to live in. So I totally agree with you what you said, that we really, these are challenging times. These are hard times. So we've seen the the video clips of two Muslim Somalian women trying to get gas in I-5 corridor and getting beaten up. We've seen all that. But the thing is, when those things happen, it provides us an opportunity to stand on the correct side of history, to do our part. Because whatever happened in Nazi Germany, it was all legal. And the Martin Luther King's words, we would not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. So it calls us to duty, to do something greater. Martin Niemöller was a pastor in Nazi Germany.
He was a Lutheran pastor.
Yes. And he said, first they came for the socialist. I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist. I didn't speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews.
Yes.
I didn't speak out because I was not a Jew. But my wife, Anne Aziza Chowdhury, she added to that. Then they came for the Native Americans. I did not speak out because I was not a Native American. Then they came for the Negro, and I did not speak out because I was not a Negro. Then they came for the Irish, and I did not speak out because I was not an Irish. Then they came from the Japanese Americans, and I did not speak out because I wasn't Japanese. Then they came for the alien, and I did not speak out because I thought I was not an alien. Then they came for the Muslims. I didn't speak out because I was not a Muslim. Then they came for me, and no one was left to speak for me. All those 7, 8 editions were done by Anne Chowdhury to Martin Niemöller's point. I totally agree with your upbeat, hopeful and upbeat, that if we put our efforts together and we stand on the correct side of history, we can really provide an alternative to fear, anxiety, and phobias.
Exactly.
We can really, really create that beloved community by love.
There's a quote from the Quran that I absolutely love that specifically says God commands us to repel evil with good. And not only does it say that, but it says basically when you do that, then somebody who is your enemy will become like a devoted friend. Right? And I gave an example of people who have fallen into that before, and it really is sort of what I hold on to. And for me, when I look around at all the problems and there's a lot of problems, no doubt, obviously with the American Muslim community as well as so many other communities here in our country and around the world. But what I look at it as is opportunities. Every single one of those is an opportunity for us to do good. As you said, stand on the right side of history, right? I believe that God is going to judge us not for our results, but for our effort. Yes. What are we doing when we are presented with all of these problems? Instead of seeing them all as problems, we can look at them each one as an opportunity to do good. So we don't just get one chance or 2 chances or 3 chances. We have literally hundreds of opportunities to do something, to stand up and make a difference. And again, I do believe now is a critical time in our nation's history. Now is really a time where we can stand up, stand on the right side of history, and really make a difference in the future direction of our country. So I look forward to these opportunities to talk to more of our neighbors and help bring about this positive change.
Wonderful.
And as a person of faith, I believe that God is working in the world, that we're not just doing this alone. that there is a force greater than us that brought all things into being, that is moving the universe toward greater equity and justice. I also recently did my DNA test here about a year ago. And I found that I have some, obviously some German ancestry, some Norwegian ancestry. I have Jewish ancestry. I also have ancestors in the Middle East and North Africa. And that reminds us that, that we're a part of a big human family, and that we're stronger than we think we are. My ancestors on my mother's side walked across Europe from Russia as refugees and came to the United States, got across the United States and started doing some farming in eastern Washington state. That took determination. It also took a lot of steps every day. They didn't try to leap across the ocean. They didn't try to jump across Europe. They decided in the morning to get up and prepare for the day and eat breakfast and then begin a long journey, that was going to be part of a much longer journey. They were strong. And I think we have to remember that we are strong. But even greater than our strength, there is a movement of spirit at work. And let's trust it and let's do our part. And then when we need to rest, well then take a rest, because there are other people walking that journey with us.
This is wonderful. It reminds me of, I married my wife. She was a widow of 13 years at that time. Her husband died with lung cancer, and that was the only child his parents had, only male they had. And I remember Papa San, and I call him Papa San with love, Reuben Waldbauer. And I have 5 grandchildren, 4 of them carry the last name Waldbauer. So in Eastern Washington. So I remember he would share some profound thoughts with me that when he was when he was child, in 1st and 2nd grade in Billings, Montana, he spoke in German, because that's the only language he knew.
Yeah.
And he was beaten
Yeah.
in the school for speaking German.
Yes.
A little child is beaten in the school for speaking German because at that time, the environment was, it has created that environment. The Germans were enemies. It's the part which we call othered. After I came out of the army, I was very unsettled, and things didn't make sense to me. And I remember that my wife took me, we read the book, The People's History of United States of America. I met Howard Zinn several times. But that I went to those places of the internment camps of Japanese Americans. I meditated there. I prayed there. I cried there for hours and hours to get a perspective, to get an understanding.
Yes.
And when we say never again, we mean never again.
Yeah.
And when we say together we will create that beloved community, we will create that beloved community. I know what your legacy will be. I know what your legacy will be. I would like to know my great audience's legacy. Look forward to the great legacy that we'll create and leave behind. Because there's a concept in Islam. Could you tell me about, charity, sadaqah jariyah? So a charity which keeps on giving, like planting a seed for a fruit tree and keeps on giving, creating a concept that people can love and create that beloved community. So would you, what is your understanding of?
That's what I think we're called to do in life. We are called to give back, to serve. Though what I like to say, and I'm sure others say it too, is we worship our Creator the best when we serve His creation. Right? And this is why there is this concept of this sort of ongoing charity, that you can contribute, you can do something today that even when we are gone, even after our life ends, it can continue serving humanity. That's what we should try. That's legacy. You're talking about legacy,
Yes.
same
So,
kind of idea.
yeah.
And one thing I like too is Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, talked about even a smile being charity. I love that. That's something easy and cheap that every single one of us can do, is just go around and smile more often and help bring charity into each other's lives. And of course, there's a high emphasis on giving and helping those in need. So we should all continue to do whatever we can do, but to be part of sort of this legacy, what we're going to leave behind for our future generations, the future of our country, we get to play a role in that. We should be honored for the role that we have to play today, and we should take our responsibility seriously. And I really hope the audience joins us and joins this movement that we have right now now of really trying to make a difference, both in combating Islamophobia and other types of hate and bigotry in our country, fighting against discrimination, racism, sexism, homophobia, all of it. This is our opportunity to stand up and say no to that and show that love is greater.
Well, and just from the Lutheran tradition, Martin Luther was one day asked by some students at his house what he would do if he thought the world would end tomorrow. His answer was, I would plant an apple tree.
Beautiful.
Yes.
So we should, so we have my beloved audience. Now we have some, our homework to do, go hug a Muslim, and hug strangers, and let's create the beloved community. Thank you for your time and effort, and
So
may you
just
have a
speak
wonderful
out.
day.